When Paris fell in 1940, the city did not scream. That was what Ellis remembered most. She had imagined defeat would sound like thunder, like collapsing walls, like crowds breaking through streets in terror. But on the morning she stepped outside her apartment building, Paris was quiet, too quiet. The kind of quiet that made every footstep feel guilty. The kind of quiet that made people lower their eyes before they even knew who might be watching. The city she had known seemed to have changed overnight. The bakery on the corner was closed. Its windows were dark. The smell of fresh bread gone from the street. A tailor's shop had pulled its shutters down, though it was still early in the day. Across the boulevard, the cafe where men used to argue loudly over newspapers had only 2 chairs left outside, both empty, both covered in a pale layer of dust. Even the pigeons seemed quieter, hopping between the stones, as if they too understood that something had been taken. Ellie stood beneath the doorway of her building, with a small basket in her hand, and looked toward the center of the street. German soldiers were walking there. They did not hurry. That was the worst part. They moved as if the city already belonged to them, as if the stones, the lamps, the bridges, and the silence had all agreed to let them pass. Their boots struck the pavement in steady rhythm. One soldier looked toward a row of windows, and several curtains immediately shifted closed. Ellis felt her fingers tighten around the basket handle. Yesterday this had been her street. The grocer knew her name. The old man who sold newspapers at the corner used to complain about the weather before handing over the morning edition. Women leaned from windows and called across to one another. Delivery carts rattled over the stones. Someone was always laughing, arguing, bargaining, singing, or calling out a greeting. Now everyone moved as if speech itself had become dangerous. A few civilians crossed the street ahead of her. A man in a dark coat removed his hat as a patrol passed. A woman carrying a cloth bag lowered her face so quickly that Elise could not see her expression. No one stopped. No one spoke. They flowed around the soldiers like water. Around a stone at the end of the boulevard, a new flag hung from a building, where the French tricolor had once moved in the wind. Elise stared at it for only a second, before forcing her eyes away. She felt as if looking too long might be a confession. She began walking toward the ration queue. The line had already formed outside a small food shop. It stretched along the wall, silent and tense. The shopkeeper stood behind a narrow opening, measuring out portions with the expression of a man performing a sad duty. There were no full shelves behind him, no baskets of abundance, no warm smell of coffee or bread, only a few crates, a scale, and a notice fixed to the door. Rationing, restricted hours, shortages, orders. Everything was becoming a notice. Everything was becoming a rule. Elise took her place at the end of the line. Ahead of her, adults stood with baskets, folded cloth bags, and empty hands. Their coats looked thinner than before. Their faces looked older. People who once complained loudly about small inconveniences now waited without protest for portions that could barely feed them through the day. A German patrol stopped near the shop front. The line did not move, but Elise felt the change pass through it. Shoulders stiffened, eyes lowered. A man near the front slipped his papers from his pocket before anyone asked for them. The patrol glanced at the queue, then continued on, only after the bootsteps had faded. Did the line breathe again? When Elise finally reached the counter, the shopkeeper gave her a small ration wrapped in paper. He did not look directly at her. "That is all?" she almost asked, but she stopped herself. Questions had become dangerous too. She carried the food home through streets that no longer felt like streets, only corridors watched by unseen eyes. At the corner, 2 soldiers stood beside a table where civilians were being made to show their papers. A barrier had been placed across the road. It was a simple thing, just wood and authority, but it changed the entire shape of the neighborhood. People no longer chose their route. They were allowed through it. When her turn came, Elise presented her documents with both hands. The soldier examined them slowly, too slowly. His eyes moved from the paper to her face and back again. She kept her expression still, not frightened, not defiant, not impatient. Stillness had become a skill. At last he returned the papers and lifted his hand. She passed through. Only when she was several steps away did she realize she had been holding her breath. By evening Paris had withdrawn into itself. Windows were darkened, doors closed early. The curfew notice in the stairwell of her building had been pasted crookedly over an older advertisement for a concert that would never take place. Elise paused before it, reading the official words in the dim light. The language was cold, exact and absolute. No unauthorized movement after the stated hour, no gatherings, no distribution of unauthorized printed material, no resistance to occupation authority. That last line stayed in her mind long after she climbed the stairs. Resistance, the word seemed impossible and alive, at the same time. Inside her small room, she placed the ration on the table. The portion looked even smaller indoors. She sat beside it and listened to the city beyond her window. For years Paris at night had been a living thing. Music, voices, carts, footsteps, laughter, bells. Now the city held its breath beneath the weight of curfew. Somewhere below, boots passed over the street. Elise did not move until they were gone. Days began to repeat. Queue, papers, notices, silence, curfew, hunger. The occupation did not need to destroy every building to change the city. It entered through the routines, through the empty shelves, through the way people stopped saying names in public, through the way a conversation ended when a stranger came too close, through the way everyone learned to look at walls, at shoes, at doorways, anywhere except directly at power. But beneath the silence, Elise began to notice other things. A scrap of paper tucked behind a drain pipe, a mark drawn in chalk near the base of a wall, gone the next day, a woman in a dark cardigan, who always seemed to appear near the ration line, then vanished down side streets, a man who bought nothing from the shop, but stood there long enough to receive a folded note with his change. At first Elise told herself not to see these things. Seeing created responsibility, but one morning, while passing a wall covered with official decrees, she noticed that the edge of one notice had lifted slightly in the wind. Behind it, hidden beneath the German order, was another piece of paper. Smaller, rougher, folded flat against the stone. Her heart began to beat faster. She looked, left then right. The street was not empty, but no one seemed to be watching her. A bicycle leaned against a wall. An old woman crossed the road with a basket. Farther away, a soldier stood at the corner, speaking to another patrolman. Elise stepped closer to the notice wall. Her hand moved before her courage could fail. She slipped 2 fingers beneath the official decree and pulled the hidden paper free. It was no larger than a page torn from a notebook. The ink was uneven, the print faint in places, but the words were unmistakable. France is not dead. She folded the leaflet quickly and hid it inside her coat. For the rest of the walk home, every sound seemed sharpened. The knock of shoes on stone, the scrape of a cartwheel, the bark of a command. From the checkpoint, she imagined the paper burning against her side like a hot coal. If someone searched her, it would be enough. A small piece of paper had become more dangerous than a knife. Inside her building, she did not unfold it until she reached the stair landing, between the 2nd and 3rd floors. The light there was dim, and the sound from the street was muffled. She read the words again. Slower this time. France is not dead. Do not believe the silence. Listen, wait. Carry hope carefully. There was no signature that made it more powerful. That night Elise hid the leaflet beneath a loose board near her bed. She lay awake long after curfew, listening to boots in the street and the distant rumble of military vehicles. The fear was still there, but now it had changed shape. Before fear had been a wall. Now there was a crack in it, thin as paper. 2 days later, she saw the woman in the dark cardigan again. This time the woman was in the stairwell of Elise's building. She was not young, but not old either. Her hair was pinned back severely, and she carried a plain cloth bag over one arm. She climbed the stairs without appearing hurried, but when she passed Elise on the landing, her hand brushed the railing and left something there. A folded slip of paper. Elise stared at it. The woman did not stop. She did not turn. She climbed one more flight and disappeared behind a door. Elise picked up the paper with trembling fingers. Inside was only one sentence. If you found the first one, you already know why. There must be a second. For a moment the stairwell seemed to tilt around her. She understood then that resistance did not begin with guns or explosions. Not here, not yet. It began with paper, with silence used against itself, with ordinary people carrying messages through ordinary places, a ration basket, a stair rail, a wall of decrees, a coat pocket, a hand that did not pause long enough to be noticed. The next day Elise returned to the notice wall. She did not know exactly what she intended to do until she was there. The official decrees stared back at her with their stamps, orders, and threats. She thought of the ration line, the checkpoint, the curfew, the way Paris had lowered its head. Then she thought of the words hidden beneath the paper. France is not dead. Her hand moved carefully. She took the small leaflet the woman had given her, and slipped it behind the corner of an official notice. Exactly where she had found. The first one she pressed the paper flat. Then she turned and walked away without looking back. Her heart hammered so loudly that she thought everyone would hear it. No one stopped her. At the end of the street she allowed herself one breath. Paris was still occupied. The soldiers still walked the boulevards. The shops were still half empty. The queues still formed before dawn. The curfew still felt like a locked gate. Every night official orders still covered the walls. But the walls no longer belonged entirely to them. Somewhere behind the decrees, beneath the silence, inside stairwells and coat pockets and folded scraps of rough paper, something had begun to move. It was small, fragile, and terribly dangerous. It had no army yet. No banners, no public voice, only hands, only courage, only people who looked frightened in the street and became brave when no one was watching. Elise walked home through occupied Paris, with her eyes lowered like everyone else. To any soldier watching, she was just another young woman carrying a basket through a defeated city. But inside her the silence had changed. It was no longer only fear, it was waiting.